Let's jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we are setting off on what is literally an epic time travel journey. We're rewinding the clock an astounding 50 million years to track down the true origins of the Indian subcontinent's first inhabitants. We are going to look at the terrifying beasts that completely ruled the land and the brilliantly resilient humans who, against all odds, managed to conquer it.
It brings up a fascinating mystery, right? Who were the actual first people to walk on Indian soil? When we picture ancient India, our minds usually jump straight to the Harappans or maybe the Vedic sages. But someone had to discover this land way before them. Who were they? Where did they even come from? And, well, what happened to them? Today, we're going to unravel the incredible story of those mysterious first arrivals.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for today. We've got 6 parts. 1. The making of India. 2. India's first humans. 3. The Toba catastrophe. 4. Arrival of Homo sapiens. 5. The survival revolution. And 6. Dawn of civilizations. We're basically tracing the ultimate hero's journey from complete geological chaos all the way to advanced ancient cities.
All right, starting with part 1, the making of India.
To really grasp all of this, we first have to wrap our heads around this massive geological timescale. 50 million years ago, India wasn't even connected to Asia. It was just this solitary landmass floating across a vast sea. Then, boom, it violently crashed into the Eurasian plate. That massive collision birthed the towering Himalayas, which then trapped passing winds to create the life-giving monsoons. But here's the crazy part. It just sat waiting for millions of years. It wasn't until about 1.5 million years ago that the first humans actually arrived. Then, a massive disaster hit 74,000 years ago, basically resetting the entire board, before our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, finally showed up roughly 65,000 years ago. Now, before humans arrived, this subcontinent was ruled by absolute monsters. I mean, just picture walking through a totally impenetrable jungle and coming face to face with a stegodon. We're talking colossal elephants with tusks 10 feet long that would literally make the ground shake. Or imagine trying to navigate a river filled with hexaprotodon. These were hippos the size of trucks, with jaws strong enough to chew through solid rock. Predators were hiding behind every single bush. This was a brutal, terrifying world, and honestly, only the absolute strongest survived.
Moving on to part 2, India's first humans.
Roughly 1.5 million years ago, a totally new creature steps into this terrifying jungle, Homo erectus. Driven by hunger and a deep nomadic instinct, they walked out of Africa and completely conquered India's jungles. And they were fearless, heavily built, giant slayers who just dominated the landscape. And we know this for a fact. Right at Athiranpakkam near Chennai, researchers found 1.5 million-year-old stone hand axes, specifically carved to have sharp edges. Even wilder, back in 1982 in Hathnora, archaeologist Arun Sanakia unearthed the famous Narmada human, a skull fragment showing this incredibly strong jaw and protruding brows. Armed with those stone axes, these athletic giants took down massive beasts and ruled the territory from the Narmada to the Godavari for hundreds of thousands of years.
Which brings us to part 3, the Toba catastrophe. Homo erectus had beaten droughts, floods, and giant predators. They probably thought they were completely invincible. But then, 74,000 years ago, a literal ticking time bomb went off in Indonesia. 3,000 kilometers. That is how far away the blast of the Toba supervolcano was heard. The sound actually reached India. But the sound wasn't the real problem. It was the white ash that started falling from the sky like snow. This huge volcanic winter blotted out the sun, turned day into pitch-black night, poisoned the rivers, and plunged a warm tropical paradise into a deadly, freezing wasteland. So, what does this all mean? Why did these physically invincible kings of the jungle die out while we survived? Well, it's a tragic irony. The exact same traits that made Homo erectus so dominant actually sealed their doom.
Their huge athletic bodies burned way too much energy, and they suddenly needed a massive food supply that just didn't exist anymore. Also, those heavy stone axes, completely useless against the small, fast animals that actually survived the ash. But the biggest issue? They lived entirely in the present. They just lacked the brain power to plan for the future or figure out how to store food for tomorrow. And just like that, they faded into the dark.
Let's look at part 4, Arrival of Homo sapiens. That ash from Toba didn't just ruin India, it severely dried out the African landscape too. So around 65,000 years ago, our direct ancestors were forced to make this desperate leap of faith just to survive. We call it the coastal migration. First, they crossed the incredibly treacherous Red Sea at Bab el-Mandeb on these fragile makeshift rafts. Then, to avoid the deadly inland deserts, they smartly stuck right to the harsh, rocky Arabian shoreline. Literally for generations, they slowly followed the coast, surviving entirely on seafood, until one day they finally reached a lush, fully recovered India.
But here's the thing you gotta wonder about. Homo sapiens weren't these giant, muscle-bound warriors like Homo erectus. We were physically smaller and definitely weaker. And prehistoric India was still a maze of deadly predators. So, how on earth did these weary, smaller travelers manage to survive those first terrifying nights in such an unforgiving environment?
That brings us to part 5, the survival revolution. To survive where sheer brawn failed, our ancestors relied entirely on their brains. First up, they needed a safe haven. They found places like the Bhimbetka caves, which acted as these brilliant natural stone castles to protect them from monsoons and predators. But the absolute game changer? Fire. Fire was the ultimate security system keeping the beasts away, but it also became humanity's very first social media. Sitting around the hearth, they shared stories, bonded, and cared for the sick. They quickly figured out that while one person is weak, a united, tightly knit group is basically invincible. And their adaptability with technology was just off the charts. Since they couldn't overpower fast prey with heavy rocks, they invented microliths, tiny, razor-sharp 1-inch stone blades they glued to sticks, basically prehistoric missile technology for hunting silently from a distance. Over in Maharashtra, we found 25,000-year-old ostrich eggshells they used as high-capacity water bowls. Meanwhile, the women were mastering early botany, figuring out exactly which seeds were edible, which literally laid the groundwork for agriculture. Oh, and they figured out how to use smoke to safely harvest pure glucose, honey, from sheer cliffs. Add in a sharing economy where if one hunter brought food, it was distributed equally, and you have a totally revolutionary survival system. But this is where it gets really deep. It wasn't just physical survival. Their consciousness was evolving too. On those walls at Bhimbetka, they used red pigments to paint animals and dances, which was likely an early form of hunting magic. Even more profound, excavations in Uttar Pradesh have revealed graves where the dead were carefully buried alongside weapons, ornaments, and meat. This is huge. It shows the very first concepts of a soul and an afterlife, a belief that death wasn't simply the end of the line. All right, moving to our final section, part 6. Dawn of civilizations.
Roughly 9,000 years ago, there was this massive shift. Humans realized they didn't have to endlessly chase food. They could actually grow it from a single seed. And by 5,000 years ago, this agricultural leap exploded into the Indus Valley civilization. To put their advancement into perspective, just look at their bricks. They used an astonishing 4:2:1 brick ratio completely universally across cities that were hundreds of miles apart. That points to a level of centralized planning and organized governance that was pretty much unmatched anywhere in the ancient world. I mean, they essentially built the world's first smart cities. If we look at Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, the urban layout had strict 90-degree grid streets for perfect traffic flow. Their sanitation included advanced covered drainage system that literally had manholes for cleaning. For water management, places like the Great Bath were heavily waterproofed with natural bitumen. They even designed their houses for privacy. Doors open to back alleys, not the main street, leading into these nice, private, ventilated courtyards. Just absolute masterclasses in urban engineering. But history always loves to throw a curveball, right?
As we move eastward towards the Ganges Plains, the excavations at Sonali in Uttar Pradesh in 2005 and 2018 completely shocked archaeologists. They unearthed indigenous copper-decorated two-wheeled royal chariots, right alongside deadly copper-hilted antenna swords. This totally upended the long-held belief that chariots were brought into the subcontinent much later by outsiders.
So it leaves us with this really provocative question. The chariots and weapons discovered at Sianali match the ancient epic descriptions of the Pandava-Kaurava war with uncanny precision. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about this. With this kind of hard, physical evidence finally emerging from the very soil of these ancient plains, is the Mahabharata just a mythological story, or could it actually be grounded in a historical truth we're only just now beginning to uncover? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me today. Stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.